Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Hello students, today once again I am here with chapter number 9, Cold War Era. In this chapter we are going to do meaning and causes and origin of Cold War, challenges to bipolarity, meaning and features of non-alignment movement, new international economic order, major conflicts during Cold War era. Here in this picture, you could see like American soldiers raising the US flag during the Battle of Iwo Jima, Japan on 23rd February 1945 and the credit raising the flag on Iwo Jima. And Soviet soldiers raising the USSR flag on the Reichstag building in Berlin, Germany in May 1945 and the end of the Second World War led to the rise of two major centers of power. The two pictures above symbolize the victory of US and the USSR in the Second World War. Now, what is Cold War? The Cold War is the tense relationship. It was confrontation, it was tension between United States and its allies. In its allies means the countries which were in the bloc of United States. It was a group which was led by United States and the Soviet Union, the USSR and its allies between the end of World War II. And the fall of the Soviet Union, it is called as the Cold War because the US and the USSR never actually fought each other directly. It was not a direct war, it was not a weapon war, it was the war of only and only the ideologies. Let's see how. In 1945, the United States and Soviet Union were allies and jointly winners in World War II, so which ended with total victory for Soviet and American forces and over Adolf Hitler's Nazi Empire in Europe. So within just a few years, however, wartime allies become mortal enemies locked in a global struggle and military, political, economic and ideological to prevail in a new Cold War. The Cold War was the war of the ideologies, and the US followed the ideology of liberal democracy and capitalism, while the USSR backed the ideology of socialism and communism. US followed the ideology of liberal and democracy and capitalism, and USSR backed the ideology of socialism and communism. The Second World War 1939 to 45 came to an end with the defeat of the Axis power led by Germany, Italy and Japan by the Allied forces led by US, Soviet Union, Britain or France. It marked the beginning of the Cold War and the Second World War ended when the United States dropped two atomic bombs on the Japanese of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 and causing Japan to surrender. And the decision of the US was both criticized and supported. Both consequence of the end of the Second World War was the rise of two new power on the global stage. The World War ended when the United States dropped two atomic bombs on the Japanese cities on 6 August 1945, Hiroshima. The bomb was condemned little boy 15 kilotons. And on 9th August 1945, Nagasaki, codenamed Fat Man, 21 kilotons. And by the early 1950s, the US and USSR were already making thermonuclear weapons and that had a yield between 10 and 15,000 kilotons. In other words, these bombs were 1,000 times more destructive than the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During much of the Cold War, both the superpower possessed thousands of such weapons. Just imagine the extent of destruction that these could cause all over the noise. In this picture, you could see the three big powers: Stalin from USSR, Winston Churchill from UK, and Roosevelt from USA. And the beginning of the Cold War is linked to the Potsdam Conference in the summer of 1945 and the Potsdam Conference. The big three Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and he was replaced on July 26 by Prime Minister Salman Attlee and US President Harry Truman met in Potsdam, Germany from July 17 to August 2, 1945 to negotiate terms for the end of World War II. Why is the end of World War II considered to be the beginning of the Cold War? Because it was not the direct war. It was not the use of weapons. Let's see how. World War II is considered the beginning of Cold War due to the following reasons. World War II had brought about the destruction in various parts of the world. As a result, only the US and the USSR emerged as two superpowers. Since both the powers followed a different ideology, only the last two powers were remaining US and USSR in the world, those who were called the superpowers. The only difference was their ideology of economic, political, and social system. And there began a competition between them to prove the supremacy. Now, what happened in order to curtail the power, each other, the two power built alliance system. That means few countries, those who were with the ideology of USSR, they just go in the blog of USSR, and those who were supporting the ideology of US, they went to their blog. So now the world was divided into two blocks, Western and Eastern. Now, despite owing the various nuclear and non-nuclear weapons, the two powers did not get into full-fledged, and they both realized that a war could only bring destruction to them without any clear conclusion, and this is called the logic of deterrence. And the Cold War ended with the disintegration of the USSR in 1991. How the Cold War begins? Let's see. The era of confrontation and competition between the US and the Soviet Union when the threat of nuclear war created constant world tension. As I told you, like United States, they supported liberalism and democracy. And Soviet Union, they were with communism. They were not supporting democracy, and this was the only reason of these two superpowers with for their confrontations, for their conflicts, for their tensions. And in April 1961, the leaders of Union of Soviet Socialist Republic were apprehensive of an American attack on Cuba. North Atlantic Treaty Organization 1949. It like the countries which were in this bloc, like NATO. This is called NATO. United States, Belgium, Britain, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and 1942 Greece and Turkey. 1955 West Germany, and 1983 Spain. The other bloc was Warsaw Pact, which was led by USSR. You could see the whole red map is the part of USSR, Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania. This was the distribution of world. The whole yellow is second world, that is your USSR. This is your third world, and yellow one is the whole NATO. Now, differing philosophies. What were the differences of these philosophies? Now, the USSR believed in democratic form of government and believed economic stability would keep peace in the world, and believed in the free enterprise system was necessary for economic growth. But on the other hand, USSR believed in a communist form of government, believed in workers revolting, striking against business owners, and taking control of government. And they also wanted to control countries between Russia and Germany. It's an economic and social system in which nearly like all property and resources are collectively owned by a classes society and not by individual system. And let us ruling the classes tremble at communist revolution. Now, why were these two superpowers so distrustful of the other? If we talk about America, there were the reasons: free elections, democratic, capitalist, survival of the fittest, richest world power, personal freedom, freedom of the media. And Soviet Union, no elections or fixed, autocratic, dictatorship, communist, everybody helps everybody, poor economic base, society controlled by NKVD, and total censorship. Now, why did superpowers have military alliances with smaller countries? For vital resources as oil and minerals, then territory from where the superpowers could launch their weapons and troops, and then locations from where they could spy on each other. Superpowers like had military alliance with smaller states who were helpful for them in gaining access to economic support to pay their military expenses. Actually, when they used to alliance with the smaller countries wanted the security. They were in the requirement of aids in different fields. So the superpowers used to help them that way and to utilize all these aspects for their own purpose. And how the smaller states were helpful for the superpowers. The loyalty of allies suggested that the superpowers were winning the war of ideas as well, and the liberal democracy and capitalism were better than socialism and communism, or vice versa. And they were also important for ideological reasons. Now, the main reasons of Cold War, the end of World War II and changes in the balance of power, rebuilding the Europe, Truman Doctrine, European Recovery Program, Marshall Plan 1947, Soviet troops occupied Eastern Europe and the Iron Division of Germany. Europe was divided into rival alliances during the Cold War. You could see the yellow part is NATO and the red part is Warsaw. It is led by USSR and this is led by US. And other communist nations are like in green part, and rest all are that light color. They all are others. Now the leaders of the Cold War in USA 45 Roosevelt and Truman, 53 Eisenhower, then 61 63 Kennedy Johnson, 69 Nixon, 74 Ford, 77 Carter, 81 Reagan, and 1989 George Bush. And USSR in 1953 Stalin, then 64 Khrushchev, then 85 Brezhnev, then 91 Gorbachev and Yeltsin. And in China it was Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. Communism was based on the 1848 publication Communist Manifesto by two German political philosophers, Karl Marx and his close associate Friedrich Engels, 1889. And what is communism? Communist Manifesto. Now Soviets take over Eastern Europe. As World War II ended and Soviet army occupied the countries of Eastern Europe that Germany had conquered during the and the Iron Curtain. Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and East Germany became satellite nations of Soviet Union. So an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill said this. Now the Truman Doctrine. US foreign policy established by President Truman saying the US would protect democracies throughout the world, and it must be the policy of the United States to support free people who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressure. It was said by Henry Truman. Now, what was the Henry Truman's doctrine? It pledged that the United States would fight communism worldwide. And Truman Doctrine was an extension to US foreign policy set forth in the Monroe Doctrine 1823 and the Roosevelt Corollary in 1904. The Truman Doctrine says that it pledged that the United States would fight communism worldwide, and Truman Doctrine was an extension to the US foreign policy set forth in the Monroe Doctrine 1823 and the Roosevelt Corollary 1904. Now, the aid of Europe. Secretary of State George Marshall toured Western Europe and witnessed widespread homelessness and famine. And fearing Europeans would turn to communism as an answer to their economic problems, Marshall proposed the US to help rebuild Europe. Now, the Marshall Plan. US plan for rebuilding Western Europe and replenishing communism after World War II, and it was a plan made by US heroes and help of people of Western Europe, and plan pumped billions of dollars into Western Europe for food and supplies. This was the Marshall Plan, which aided Western Europe and moved to be a great success. And within 4 years, countries receiving aid saw a 41% higher industrial production than on the eve of World War II. And countries were established and exports were rising rapidly. The Eastern Europe countries were offered to take part in the Marshall Plan. And what is this cartoon trying to say? And but Stalin and other Eastern Europe leaders refused financial help from the United States. The Potsdam Conference. The Potsdam Conference was a meeting of the Allied leaders during World War II to decide what to do with the Germany. Now, the division of Germany. After World War II, Germany was divided into four zones. It was occupied by French, British, American, and Soviet troops. And occupation zones after 1945, Berlin is the multinational area within the Soviet zone. In response, the Soviets cut off the West Berlin from the rest of the world with a blockade, and eventually site of the Berlin Wall is also shown here. Now the Berlin airlift. The airlift continued for 11 months before Stalin finally lifted the blockade, and the Berlin airfield saved the people of West Berlin from falling under Soviet Union control. And Soviet blockade of West Germany convinced many Americans that the Soviets were trying to conquer other nations. Birth of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, formed in 1949 to protect Western Europe from Soviet aggression. And the people, those who were with the ideology of NATO, they joined this organization. The Warsaw Pact. Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and East Germany became satellite nations of Soviet Union. And Warsaw Pact was the Soviet Union's response to the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now the Cold War heats up. On October 1st, 1949, the People's Republic under Mao Zedong was proclaimed in China, and this communist trump was a great shock to the United States. The Cold War is heating up, and the proxy wars, Chinese Civil War, as I said before, Korean War, Vietnam War, Cuban Missile Crisis, Soviet occupation on Afghanistan, Cold War, and Liberian War of the Bangladesh. Now let's revise what we have done till now. In April 61, the leaders of China were worried that the United States of America would invade communist-ruled Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro. In April 1961, the leaders of Union Soviet republics were worried about that United States of America would invade communist Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro. And complete the sentence, the Western Alliance was formalized into an organization known as North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And state whether it is true or false that NAM gave European countries a way of staying out of alliances. This is false. Now let's match the column A with B. Alliance system by USA, it is Seattle. Berlin and Congo is with the arenas of Cold War. Socialism and communism is Soviet Union, and NAM is Joseph Broz Tito. And when did Cold War begin? By the end of the Second World War, and which two superpowers emerged after the Second World War, America and Soviet Union. And the full form of NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Cold War spreads to Asia also. Communists take over in China, and Mao Zedong takes control of Chinese government from Chiang Kai-shek's National Party. And half the world now appeared to be under communist control, and the country of Korea became the next battleground in the Cold War. The space race also began at the same time. Candy's challenge was met on July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong became the first human step foot on the moon. And that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. This is said by Neil Armstrong. Berlin Wall built. Soviet wanted to keep Germans from moving out of East Germany into West Berlin, where they could become free. And Berlin Wall became the symbol of communist operation around the world. See, this is the picture where Berlin Wall was made. Ich bin in Berliner 1963, President Kennedy tells Berliners that the West is with them. Vietnam War, and it happened between 1965 to 73. The Vietnam War, see the pictures, how brutal movies, like pictures are these, how people were made, killed, and how the people were suffering in the Vietnam War. Key figures in the Vietnam War, Ho Chi Minh, William Westmoreland, Lincoln, and Johnson. And Mr. Chi was the president of North Vietnam who led the efforts to defeat South Vietnam and support of the South Vietnam Vietong. and Mr. William, American commander in South Vietnam, who told people in media that the United States was close to winning the war, even though it wasn't. And Lyndon said President of United States, who was president during much of the Vietnam War, greatly escalated the US soldier involvement in the conflict. Then the Robert McNamara, U.S. Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War, who made the American Republic feel like we were winning the war. Then Richard Nixon, President of United States during the latter part of Vietnam War, and then Mr. Blem, President of South Vietnam, who was corruption and harsh standards led numerous people to turn the Vietcong. Vietnam in 50s, following the World War II, the French controlled Southeast Asia known as Indochina. Ho Chi Minh led a revolt against the French to gain independence for Vietnam, and in 1954 the French fell to the Vietmen and they withdrew from the Indochina, leaving Vietnam a divided country. Now, the Afghan Soviet War. The Soviet war in Afghanistan was a war fought between the forces of the Soviet Union and Islamic tribes of Afghanistan who were against the communist government set up by the Soviet. And the war began in December 1979 and lasted until February 1989. Cold War and Atomic Intelligence Game, CIA USA and KGB USSR. The War of the Industrial Revolution, New Technology. The arms race became focus of the Cold War, and after nuclear bomb, America tested the first hydrogen or thermonuclear bomb in 1952, beating the Russians in the creation of super bomb. Nuclear weapons. The USA was the first introducer in on July 16, 1945. USA tested its nuclear weapons in September 23rd, 1949 at first. Great Britain possessed it on October 3rd, 1952. France on 13 February 1960 and China on 16th October 1964. Now once again let's revise. Important events happened after Second World War: emergence of two superpowers, Soviet Union and America, formation of UNO, emergence of Cold War in 45 and its end in 1990, and beginning of non-alignment movement. And what is meant by Marshall Plan? It was named after US Foreign Minister. Under this plan, European countries were helped by America, and consequently their economic conditions came at the same level as it was before war in a very less period of time, and this helped in improvement of economic conditions of Western European countries. And what is NATO? The bipolarity system gave birth to military alliance in April 1949. Ship of America Alliance was formalized into an organization, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was an association of 12 states which declared the armed attack on any of them in Europe and North America would be regarded as attack on all of them, and each of these states would be obliged to help the others. Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, or Holland, Norway, Portugal, Britain, and America were involved in this, and later on, Greece, West Germany, and Turkestan were also included in this treaty. And any one Eastern Alliance and the three Western Alliance in the era of Cold War. So Eastern was Warsaw Pact, Western Alliance, and North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization SEATO, and Central Treaty Organization CENTO or Baghdad Pact. And why did India not support any of the two blocs during the Cold War? Because India wanted to save its sovereignty, and that time India needed economic development. Because regional unity and integrity rather than politics, India did not want any kind of obstacle, and its development by supporting any of the blocs. To summarize, India wanted to overall development by staying away from any alignment. Now, challenge to bipolarity. The word bipolar stands for the two poles or the two extremities. And who are those two bipolars? USA and USSR. In international politics, bipolarity meant the division of the world into two power blocs, the Anglo-American bloc and the Soviet-Russian bloc. With the end of the Cold War, the bipolar world came to an end and the leaders of non-alignment movement had been making serious efforts to ease tensions in the world. Now, what were the challenges to bipolarity? The Afro-Asian Conference held the Indonesian city of Bandung in 1955, commonly known as the Bandung Conference, marked the zenith of India's engagement with the newly independent nation and African nations. And the Bandung Conference later led to the establishment of the NAM. And non-alignment movement gave the newly independent countries a way of staying out of the alliances. The roots of NAM went back to the friendship among the five leaders: Yugoslavia's Joseph Broz Tito, India's Jawaharlal Nehru, Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, and Sukarno of Indonesia and Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah in 1956. And the first non-aligned summit was held in Belgrade in 1961, and the first summit was attended by 25 members. The 18th Summit of Non-Alignment Movement was held in October 25th, 26, 2019 in Baku, Azerbaijan, and the summit was attended by the designation from more than 120 countries.